I imagine people watching this, especially teachers, will think, oh yeah, I've seen a similar map of showing maybe urbanization, like a online maybe GIS map where they've seen this. And then to use that in conjunction with the maps in your book, you really can build a narrative, and even more importantly, get students to see if they can build a hypothesis. And then, the fact that more than one data set, more than one data source combined together can be exceptionally powerful. Mm-hmm. And you change the narrative in a way. You change what you're trying to aim to get across, the what you're trying to say, just by putting different data. How do you feel about, this kind of stuff? What kind of impact has it had on you with regards to mapping this kind of?
It's a very good question. I mean, I think we often say cartographers and map makers have this kind of God's eye view of the world. They're somehow detached from it, looking at from above down upon it, and it's almost quite a sterile relationship you have. It's part of the world I've never been to. I've not met any of the people that have been impacted directly by some of these things that we map in the book. And so how do we, how you respond to that as a map maker is quite different perhaps, or you can almost forget the responsibility you have to kind of show those things and tell those kinds of stories in a way that is kind of sensitive and understanding and powerful. And it is something where I always stop and think, what am I doing here? Am I comfortable doing this? How do I feel as a taking my step away from the map and saying, well, how do I feel if I saw this map? And how would I feel if I was someone impacted directly by that map? And it's something that, it's a responsibility I think Oliver and I both take really seriously in these kinds of books, because you can't, you can't gloss over it or be, they're not just data points. That underneath them, they are. We know that there are kind of human beings there, and so that's really important.
You use the word responsibility. That's something that's key in itself. That both yourself and Oliver have recognised the responsibility and the privilege that you do have. With the skill that you've got, with the things that you've learned. But to also be aware that these things can have an impact on a quite fundamental level on people's livelihoods, on people's sense of being, on their lived experience. Is this map producing an accurate portrayal of somebody's lived experience? And so the fact that you use that word responsibility, I feel, is very, very poignant. So one of these maps that you have created is called Light Levels. And that shows on a global scale, particularly focusing on Europe, parts of Africa and Asia, of how lights have dimmed and how they've grown in intensity through the period of 2012 to 2016. And there's quite marked places where there's been an increase in light and a decrease in light. And a particular area that you focus on, which you zoom into, is the area of Syria, of Turkey, of Lebanon, and that kind of regions. And this really speaks to a narrative to me. You can use this in so many different ways because of its temporal nature, like where there's inequality, where there is a change in population density, economic development, or even conflict and war, which is a big theme in that. So can you tell us a little bit more about what you were focusing on with this Light Levels map?
So this is a really great example of how a data set can tell many different stories. And in this case, it's only two time periods we're looking at. We're looking at 2012, which was a kind of a NASA nightlights image that they took then, and then actually data from 2016, which is kind of 4 years after. So what has happened in that 4-year period around the world that could drive changes in how bright city lights are, or towns or roads and that kind of thing. And I think the area where there is this kind of really impactful story is, as you say, is Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and the impacts of the Syrian civil war on where people are. And so, cities were completely flattened, and so bright lights are now extinguished in parts of Syria. And then around the fringe of the border, just over the border into Lebanon or Turkey, more lights are appearing, and those are the refugee camps that were created as people fled the conflict in Syria. And so, if you didn't know any of that history, you could still look at this map and say something big has happened here. We've gone from a bright area to a dark area, and then away from that dark area, we've now got a halo of lights. What's happened there? And you can work through it and say, well, actually, people must have moved, because it's people that create the lights in general. Why have they moved? And that history is just in one data set, and I find that kind of thing incredibly powerful to work with, and quite a strong story.
Yeah, and it really challenges this kind of sense that development and progression must always go forward. Especially when you're teaching a bunch of young students, it's the Rostov model of development. You start off here and you go up the scale, and there's very, very few models which actually show a kind of regression down into these archaic measures of development, and that's what I really, really love about this.
Yeah, and I think, you mentioned the development story. I think, and the idea that development is always one direction, and I think that this data is a good. There are other examples where you could look at the urban-rural transition. So, parts of China are dimming, or one of the other maps in the book is talking about how many more cities there are, and people are moving into cities in China, India as well. And so again, even over a relatively short period, we can actually see a big global snapshot of these processes playing out, and the impacts that people leaving rural areas may have on night lights and things. So it's certainly a powerful data set, and one that you could spend a long time exploring.